And then welcome again to FinTech Summit 3.0, Banking and Tech, Solving Regulatory, Legal, and Security Problems. I'll be the moderator for the afternoon. My name is Olayinka Shitu. I'm the Chief Transformation Officer at FirstBank. My role is really on executing the bank's strategy. So get involved in a lot of all our strategic priorities, and certainly the FinTech agenda is one of those. Okay, so I'll run us through how we'll run the session. So it's going to be very interactive. So it's really question and answer. I'll do introductions and then invite our panelists to the front of the room, and then we'll discuss some of the issues around this regulatory, legal, and security aspect of the fintech. It's not really focused on fintech per se, it's not really focused on banking, but the integration, and that's the key theme of the summit, the fact that we're integrating fintech and banking introduces specific considerations, and that's what we'll try and discuss as well. So we'll run in question and answer. I'll lead some of the conversations, but do feel free to raise your hands, and then we'll take questions. The other thing I'd like to note is, thank you very much. I am pleasantly surprised at the number of people attending the security, legal, and regulatory framework session. It's a very, very key part of fintech and banking, but not one a lot of us find very sexy, right? We want to be creating products and scaling, but this is a very, very critical aspect of the whole fintech agenda. Hopefully by the time we're done with the session, that you will kind of get further validation of why you're here. The fintechs that are able to manage the regulatory, legal, and security aspects have a very, very big competitive advantage. So I think it's really wise that some of you have chosen to join us on this panel. Okay, so I'll start with introductions and start calling our panelists on to the front. I keep trying to say stage, but let's pretend it's a stage. So I'll start with Mr. Olubukola Akinwumi. Mr. Akinwumi is the Director with Payment Systems Policy at the Central Bank of Nigeria. So he started his career in accountancy and has moved through investment, brokerage houses, and banking, and before joining the CBN as a payment system analyst. He's had a progression through different senior roles within the bank, and up to the current role which he occupies as the policy manager head payment system policy. His expertise cuts across policy advisory, strategy, formulation and development, change management, stakeholder management, payment system risk assurance, policy analysis, amongst other things. And obviously also lots of academic achievements along the way. So he went to Delta State, he's been with ESUT, and also Oxford, University of California, and University of Oxford as well. So I'd like to invite Mr. Akinwumi on stage, please. The next person is Tosin Fanirodada. So Tosin has the Lagos Innovates program at the Lagos State Employment Trust Fund. In her current role, she is responsible for managing a set of programs that provide an enabling environment for tech startups to thrive in Lagos State and cultivating strategic partnerships to promote the programs. So she's joined LSETF as the head of strategy and partnerships. And prior to joining LSETF, she's worked in corporate banking and as a financial analyst. So her past career includes Pricewaterhouse in Boston, and she went to college and master's in University of Massachusetts, and also she is a CPA licensed in Mass as well. Tosin, please come on stage. Thank you. Our third panelist is Odunoluwa Longe. So she's co-founder and lead counsel at the Longe practice. So Nigeria's foremost entrepreneur-focused law firm. So Odun is also co-founder at DIY Law, an award-winning and leading legal technology startup in Africa at TLP. So she represents both startups, innovative-driven enterprises, SMEs, and early-stage investors. And as a result, she likes to refer to herself as lawyer of entrepreneurs, where lawyer and lawyer equal lawyer plus lover. That's going to be your first question to explain that. So she's also country representative Justice Innovation West Africa for the Hague Institute for the Innovation of Law. She started her career in practice, so corporate commercial practice with Shulola and Akpana. And also she's worked with us, she's been part of the FirstBank family in the past, so she's worked with MBN Quest as well. So academic affiliations include LLB from Lagos State University, and of course Nigerian Law School, and then also Masters in Law from Northwestern University School of Law, and also a business admin certificate from Kellogg School of Management at Northwestern. So please do come on. Thank you. Our fourth panelist is Bumi. Bumi is a serial entrepreneur, technology innovator, and investor. So the CEO of Venture Garden Group. So VGG is one of the largest fintech investment companies in Africa. They capitalize with over 20 million US private equity funding from Convergence Partners. Backed by IFC, CDC, and FMO, so very, very strong pedigree. So VGG is the parent company of Venture Garden Nigeria, high-growth technology platform company addressing payment and data inefficiencies across multiple sectors. And also Greenhouse Capital, venture arm of VGG, which has invested in 15 innovative fintech companies across Africa, and also own or promote Nigeria's iconic technology campus, Vibranium Valley, somewhere on the mainland. So it's more or less an innovation lab, wave space, if you will. So VGG has dedicated resources to transforming Africa through technology and have successfully led several impactful change programs. Bumi has been nominated as top 100 most influential people of African descent in business and entrepreneurship by the United Nations. VGG was also recognized by the British Parliament for its contribution to transparency and good governance in Africa. In 2018, Bumi received the Trailblazer Award at the Nigerian American Multicultural Council and VGG was recognized for its support to the federal government of Nigeria in achieving a digital-first approach to social benefit delivery. Bumi, please do join us up front. Round of applause. And the last panelist is a friend, I think, and a colleague of mine, Ari Singh Naji. He is our Chief Information Security Officer at FirstBank. He is an accomplished data and information security strategist and practitioner. So with nearly 15 years of experience in conception, engineering, design, delivery, operation, and optimization of cyber data and information security capabilities, risk management, networking, IT ops, and project management. Is an electrical and electronics engineer from Futo and also has masters in project management. He has a long list of security-related certifications. They're too long, so I won't read all of them. And is currently, as I said, our Group Chief Information Security Officer for FirstBank Group, where he oversees implementation of processes and technology-driven solutions to monitor, detect, prevent, and respond to threats to data and information assets of the bank. Prior to that, he had both operational and strategic roles in banking, telco, IT, OEM, and service integrator industries. He's also Vice Chairman Committee of CISOs for DNBs and PSBs, and a Director of the ISC2 Nigeria Chapter. Harry Singh, please do join us up front. So I think I was sitting on to stand over. Okay, I think I'm getting feedback that the room is getting very cold, yes? Okay, excuse me. Okay, so hopefully fix that. Okay, so thanks to our panelists for joining us, and more importantly to our audience for coming in to participate in this forum. Like we said, this is focused on discussing specific issues around banking and tech, solving regulatory, legal, and security problems. So I'll talk through some of the issues we think are a bit topical in this space, and then kind of lead the discussion through the session. So a number of issues have been coming on, especially as the fintech space matures, and as we start to think through the bank fintech integration agenda, which again is our focus for Summit 3.0. So one of the things which we know has been going on is around clarity in the regulations. So there's been no clarity yet on who's to approve some of the new initiatives among regulators. So some of the stake players, as stakeholders, as you can imagine, with CBN, NICOM, PENCOM, SEC. Within the digital space, a lot of the new initiatives cut across the regulatory landscape. So there's some of the feedback we've been getting around who exactly owns this space in terms of setting regulations or signing off on frameworks and the like. So clarity around regulatory framework, I think, will be one of the things we hope to discuss. The second one is around data privacy and protection. So there's a lot of legal implications around how banks protect customer data. We heard that in the keynote address, especially the last questions around how do banks monetize the vast amount of data they have. How do they do this in a very disciplined way and without violating customer confidentiality, privacy, and protection? But more importantly, beyond that just being a consideration is the fact that there are now regulations in place as well. So we have NDPR and GDPR. So it's what are the limitations of partnerships that require data sharing with fintech? So one of the areas we'll also discuss as well. We've talked a lot around the fact that a lot of the fintech space are coming into the digital payment space, right? And with that, what goes top of mind is around fraud, right? So how and what's the partnership agenda and response to between the fintech and the banks around how we manage fraud issues and adequately to protect consumers. The other area of discussion will also include cybersecurity. So cybersecurity has been one of Central Bank of Nigeria's focus areas. So again, there's a framework in place and guideline that's being used to govern and direct how players in that space, the expectations and the like around cybersecurity issues. So the question there, of course, again is what's the agenda? How do fintechs and banks integrate, collaborate to address what's clearly a big issue around securing the whole ecosystem? Kind of related to that also includes this big thing around KYC and extending that to authentication methods. So traditionally, lots of the KYC and authentication methods have been kind of password, PIN-based, but more increasingly within industry, and indeed we're seeing a lot of developments in the fintech space around how do we integrate biometric into this. So there begins to come a tension, is there a transition? How do we bring customers how do we bring customers along on how we're making sure we're not pushing customers beyond where they're comfortable with? So those are just one of, I guess, 3, 4, 5 areas of discussion. I think it's best we kind of start the discussion, okay? So I'll direct this to, as you would expect, to our regulator. So Mr. Olubukola Akinwumi, but he does prefer to be called Akin. So, Akin, the first question is, in an age of constant, complex, and disruptive technological innovations, regulators worldwide have been lenient on fintechs. I don't know if that's true, but that's part of what I think why we're here. But it seems like regulators are more focused on banks. Are they turning a blind eye to what's going on in the fintech space? So the key question here is, how do you keep up with dealing with developing policies that cater to this disruptive and dynamic technologies? So that's for Aki.
Thank you very much. As public servants, we can be a bit touchy with designations, so permit me to quickly make an amendment to my introduction. You at some point introduced me as the director. I'm actually an assistant director, right? On the director of payment system management department, who has actually asked me to represent him here. His name is Samuel C. Okojeri, so I'm representing director of payment system management department, Samuel C. Okojeri. I haven't done that. So
thank you.
Back to your question. Fine. Perhaps it's a perception that regulators focus more on banks than the fintechs. But I'd like us to look at it from this perspective. Banking, in the strict sense of it, developed in the age of trust, so to speak. Now, fast forward to today. Perhaps we've redefined trust amongst innovators. It's now about speed, ease, and convenience. So you're likely to get people to trust you today as a financial service provider if you're able to convince them about the ease of using the service as well as the convenience. Now, from the perspective of the Central Bank of Nigeria, the banking industry has provided the core infrastructure based on which we've seen so many innovations today. So if you are to ensure safety, security, and soundness of the financial system, you're likely to want to focus more on the banking industry. But like I said, it's still a perception. At, say, some 10 years ago, or thereabouts, or even much earlier than that, we had some, let's say, one or two non-banks within the industry, which you can refer in today's words as fintechs. Perhaps most of them are switches. Let's take one, for example. In building that one, InterSwitch, to be specific, you'll recall that banks were instrumental in developing that institution in the first instance. And the essence is, if you instill that trust, that risk management function and principles that is accepted within the banking world, within such an institution, then you can be sure that the service they are providing will operate within that sphere. So in dealing with fintechs today, the central bank believes that no fintech, largely in Nigeria, has come out with a solution without integrating to the banks, without integrating to the likes of institutions that have been built by the banks, NIBS, InterSwitch, and the likes. So you need to continue to focus on those institutions to guide those who are coming in, which are mostly non-banks. And in doing so, to be specific, 2009, when we started opening up to more non-banks, we didn't just do that all by ourselves. We called in banks and some potential non-bank players, and we said, let's define how this journey will look like 10 years down the line. So we came up with the Payment System Vision 2020. And upon that strategy document, we started coming out with rules and regulations that not just regulate the non-bank players within the financial services, but also encourage influx of ideas, services, from mobile money to the time when we came out with the cashless policy, and then you have payment solutions, payment terminal service providers providing services to the banks in deploying POS. Then come to the era of payment solution service providers. All those have been done because we've started with some form of regulation to guide operation. But how do we interpret the regulation? How do banks, integrate the newcomers? The banks and the innovators are expected to be collaborators in this space. Now, we have to ensure that banks are handholding the innovators appropriately so that we don't disrupt the entire system. Because at the end of the day, we're all trying to get some benefits from the financial services sector of the financial system. If we fail at any point in time, then there will be no business for anyone to do.
Thank you very much for that response. At the risk of oversimplifying your response, I think what we got from that was that the regulatory landscape or frameworks from the from the CBN point of view, is still going to be bank focused on the assumption or the expectation that the fintechs are not operating in a vacuum. So by extension, the expectations that we have of the banks will also extend to the fintechs. That's not an oversimplification, is it? In essence, okay. So I think the next question is where we hear from someone really in industry and kind of get feedback from his point of view on how they've had to respond or navigate through CBN-led or industry regulation. Can you guys hear me? I think you can, yes. So question then is to Bumi around, with the rapid technology growth that is changing or driving the regulatory landscape, especially with the introduction of laws like GDPR and NDPR, how were you able to adjust your own business model approach to these regulations in terms of, is this something you accepted, you tried to engineer around, or is this just something you, as well as a key player in the industry, understand to be a major expectation of a venture, of a fintech, if you will? So you can use all the examples. I think I just mentioned GDPR as an example. As these things, those regulations come in, they influence how you're going to play within the industry, how you're going to collaborate, what's been the approach or your thinking around their place within the innovation and fintech agenda.
Thank you. Hello? Thank you. Okay. All right. Good morning, everyone. And yeah, thanks for the opportunity to be here. For me, I will be speaking both as an entrepreneur and also as an investor as well in the fintech ecosystem. And for us, we believe that from a regulatory standpoint, that it needs to be clearer, how we navigate, for us, and essentially the central bank has done, a good job, right, in the journey so far in the financial services sector, but at the same time, when we see a lot of investors coming to Nigeria and saying, okay, how do we play? How do we participate, right? I'll take the mobile money, framework as a good example. So years ago, the mobile money framework was released, and maybe about 20, 25 licenses was issued. We had some, companies we invested in that actually went through that process, and they burnt a lot of cash because really it never really saw the light of day. Now, what's the point I'm drawing out of that? The point is that, as an entrepreneur, as an investor, you want a lot of clarity on how to play, what's the regulatory, framework around how you participate in the fintech space. Now, unfortunately, as an innovator, if your solution is actually truly innovative, disruptive innovation, most likely you are way ahead of regulation, right? So we're almost in a dichotomy or a little bit of an impasse saying, should we actually go ahead and be aggressive in defining the regulation, just like we did for mobile money, in which case we issued 25 licenses, and then 10, 15 years later, there's no operator or very few operators out of the 25 that have built a viable business. So which means that there's a lot of investors that lost money. So perhaps maybe we were too fast to regulate in that instant. Now, on the other hand, as an entrepreneur, you have a pitch deck, you create a proof of concept, you get investor, interested in your idea, and then they ask you, okay, what's the regulatory environment? And they either say, because I don't see anything, I'm afraid I'm not going to invest, so no. Or they say that, oh, the regulatory environment says that you need 1 billion naira share capital, so you must be raising 3 billion naira for you to even start a business, so you're also dead. So I think that's the dilemma that we have. And so, how have we navigated around that? For me, I'm not supposed to say this when CBN is in the room, but when entrepreneurs come to me, I just say, just go ahead and just do it. We'll go and beg for forgiveness later. So do it and beg for forgiveness is sort of the approach we take, because there's truly a dilemma, and I don't blame the central bank, because you can't regulate what you don't know. So you cannot regulate innovation that has not been created already, right? And when you over-regulate, what tends to happen is that the industry will now look for and create black market around your regulation, right? Just like, when you talk about, a lot of these, different services, you can, okay, when you talk, I don't want to say crypto, right? So let's talk about virtual assets, right, as a broad category. So when you over-regulate, fiat and currency, then you create a whole another market that's going to grow extremely fast around virtual assets. So I think that's something we have to, think about in the collaboration between the central bank, the banks, and fintechs.
Thank you very much for that. I think my next point, I might as well just take it to okay, I'll direct the next question to Odun. You've set up a law practice that's very, very focused on entrepreneurs, and I would think most of them, really, a majority of them will be in the fintech space. I know you've done a lot of work around technology and digital. So is the assumption that unless it's explicitly banned, you can assume it is fine, a correct one for entrepreneurs to be thinking, or kind of share with us on how you've advised and worked with a number of entrepreneurs to navigate this gray area. As Bumi said, you're innovating at a faster space by definition than what the regulator has frameworks or guidelines for. So how do they manage that risk, both in terms of investments, but also legal and even criminal? How do you advise and work with businesses that find themselves in that situation?
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for the question. So working with fintech, working with financial technology startups has been interesting, because most times, as Bomi rightly said, is they're innovating faster than the regulation. They're also innovating faster than the profession itself, even faster than lawyers. So it comes with a lot of reading, both within the jurisdiction and outside the jurisdiction. But usually what we tend to do is you try to find, when someone comes up with an innovation, within the existing framework, what exists, what can you hide under? So for instance, if your fintech product has an element of lending or savings, then you probably want to go for the microfinance bank license, because that's the cheapest you probably can get, or a money lender's license within the state you're operating. That's not full coverage. Or if it has to do with USSD, there's a USSD regulation if it has to do with tax. So, there's some regulations that exist, it's just that it's very fragmented. The CBN has actually been quite proactive. I think there are about 6 or 7 guidelines that you could come under as a fintech company, but you then have to look at everything, that which of these regulations does my business fall under. I know the CBN and also the SEC, the SEC, came up with regulatory sandbox. They've come up with the ideas, but they're not yet operational. And I think that kicking this in, making this operational will go a long way in understanding what regulations and testing, being able to craft policies around this innovation. Because if you have an innovator that can act within the framework of that sandbox, then the regulator itself has a first-hand overview of what risk and compliance framework to build around the innovation. So from an investment perspective, when an investor is investing in a fintech, what we try to do is to show them, similar to, show them what frameworks we can probably hide under. You might not find the exact thing you're doing, but there's always a license that allows you, that gives you coverage. And when the regulator comes, oh, why are you doing this? Then you beg for forgiveness and say, but I have this license. Sometimes it's by partnership. You find that a lot of fintechs, whether it's the crowdfunding one or the lending ones, it's either they're partnering with banks or they're partnering with trust companies to be able to at least have some regulatory coverage, so that even for customer confidence, because customers want to know you're regulated before I give you money as a startup. So for customer confidence, we encourage our startups, okay, you can't get a license, you can't afford a license, why not partner with a trust company to hold your funds? Why not partner with a bank to do the lending? And that way you still have that ability to give customer confidence, and you're less likely to get into, to breach any regulatory provisions.
Okay, thank you very much. One of the first things people, at least businessmen, usually will say that the first person you should get as an entrepreneur is a very good lawyer, and after that, an accountant. It's very, very clear navigating this fintech space is complex, and as I said at the beginning, there are lots of jurisdictional issues going to SEC, CBA, NICOM, and the things. So I think for the fintechs in the room, do get very, very good advice. As Bumi said as well, you don't want to overinvest. You want to make sure that as you're putting in capital, that capital is protected as well. I think I'll move the question now to just kind of more to Tosin's area. You're working with a lot of startups, you're boosting startups. What's the advice in terms of, we have CBN in the house, in terms of simplifying the regulatory landscape? A lot of the fintechs won't be as big as Bumi, where they may even have in-house counsel or be able to hire an attorney like Juni, but how do they simplify how fintechs come into this space? Because you are focused on bringing and growing the entrepreneurial pool with minimal, almost bootstrapping, right? What's your advice, or what are you seeing? Is regulations hampering growth, or do you still see there's enough room for growth within the existing legal frameworks?
Thank you for that question, Olayinka. Good afternoon, everyone. Truly honored to be here, but I feel like FirstBank is trying to freeze me to death. I don't know if I'm being punished for coming late, but I'm freezing and shaking inside. But back to your question, Olayinka, on recommendations for the CBN, and as I listen to Bumi and listen to Odun as well, and it's like I'm hearing the same thing. I'm hearing partnerships. I'm hearing that you cannot regulate what you don't know. And my advice to the CBN would be to look at 3 approaches that I think may work. And the first is an adaptive approach, where we go from, instead of regulating and forgetting, we're being responsive. And we also have an iterative approach. And what that means is you're constantly changing and and you're constantly evolving. Because the truth is, as Bumi said, startups, it could be fintech, it could be health tech, whatever it is, they're constantly changing their business models. They're constantly pivoting. And the truth is, they don't even know what they're waiting for when they start. So it keeps growing. The second approach that I think that they can look at is an outcome-based approach, where you focus on the outcome and you focus on performance. And I'll give you an example. At the Lagos State Employment Trust Fund, our mandate is very clear, is to create jobs. They didn't say this is how you should do it. They said go and create jobs. So it was left to us to figure out that providing access to finance to MSMEs will help them grow their business and in turn create jobs. Supporting the innovation ecosystem will allow us to have more successful startups in Lagos State, which can help us create an exponential number of jobs. So that's an outcome-based approach. My last approach would be to look at a collaborative approach, like Odun and Bumi had said already, where you have regulators, you have people from the private sector, you have entrepreneurs, you have the investors as well, and you're all kind of in the conversation so that when these regulations are being tested, they're actually being tested by people that know what they're supposed to be used for, and for the end users as well, and people that can provide feedback from testing in a controlled environment. So I think those three approaches are things that can be looked at, but collaboration and outcome is key for us. I'm still cold.
Thank you. So coming back to kind of where we started, just to kind of frame this, I think we've all agreed that there is a place for regulation. I'm not hearing anyone saying CBN, step back, let innovation go. Because as we said, and I think one of the key panelists said as well, that especially in fintech, is around trust, integrity, and then security as well, protection. So if we lose any of those key things, I think we put the whole ecosystem at risk, especially in fintech. So on that note, I think I'll have Arison talk through more now around the cyber security agenda. So what impact are we seeing around cyber security? And how and what are the factors that in bringing fintech and bank together, what new considerations now need to be managed within the cyber security mandates? But you can just kind of give us an overview of this cyber security. I don't want to call it threat, but I call it an agenda within the banking, financial services, and indeed fintech space, and what we're doing to maintain the integrity, trust, protect of that industry.
Okay, thank you everyone. First, let me start this way, aligning with what Aki said. With innovation, we're looking at convenience, right? We're looking at ease. If I ask you, for example, an ATM machine, when it's fully loaded, takes about 4 million naira. If you need to take money through robbery from an ATM machine, you probably need a lot of investment to do that. You need a lot of physical force to do that. But if you want to take money through digital approach, can you guess how much you can take? And if you need to prepare to steal money from an ATM machine, you need at least a month to prepare. I mean, you have everything in place, you just need to prepare, because you need to do your scanning and do a lot of other things. But if you need to steal from through digital means, give me an idea of how much you think the highest that had been stolen before within 1 minute. So the point here is, with a lot of collaboration that is happening, we're moving away from a situation where security is a hurdle you need to pass and becomes an enabler, something that helps you become more agile and faster, right? I was discussing with someone last night, and I said, if you remember, if you have a car and you have an automatic braking system and you have a manual braking system, you realize that you are able to move faster when you have an ABS that is functional, because when you want to stop, you can actually stop. But if the alternate option is, if you want to stop, if you want to stop at the traffic light, you need to start from here to engage it, right? So, meaning that cybersecurity, cyber warfare, cyberspace is no longer something people have as a competitive advantage. It has become a rudimentary requirement. So if you want to innovate, if you want to create services, it's not something you say, oh, I am cyber secure because of a bank with me. It has to be something that is rudimentary. It's something that becomes a primary input, because however you take it, you are still trading trust. However you take it, whether you are easy, whether you're confident, whether you offer 24/7 services, you are trading trust. One mishap, it will take you another 3, 4, 5 months. In some cases, you never recover. So it means that today, when we engage fintechs, it's not a question of no, it's a question of how. Do you understand? Because the goal is static, but the approach keeps shifting. So I tell people that, I say something like, yes, but. Do you understand? Yes, but. Yes, we can do this, but we need to put this in place. So today we call ourselves enablers, digital player enablers. Because if we get the system secure and agile and adaptive, it means that there's a whole lot you can do. And we want to see that happen. So now we have a lot of support from CBN. They've come out with the cyber framework. Prior to that, there's a lot of dependencies. For example, if you want to do card business, there's PCI DSS. There's a lot of frameworks that we can adapt and customize to your environment. Bearing in mind there are services today we offer in Nigeria that are not offered in so many other places. So that customization had to happen. That collaboration has to happen. That focus to say that this is a competitive factor, something that everybody has to work together. I'll give you a typical example would be the BVN, right? So today, when you get watchlisted or blacklisted by a bank, it becomes more difficult for you to play within the banking sector. Why? Because they're collaborated. Because they saw it as a common threat. So now when you are, whatever services you carry out, what you will ask yourself is, how do I ensure that this service will be secure to the customer? How do I ensure that the trust is maintained? How do I ensure that when I want to break, that I can break? And just to give a simple example, so the whole idea today is no longer about being able to prevent it from happening, because it will surely happen, right? The whole idea is to be able to prevent it as one of the actions, but be able to also detect it and contain it. So you say, for example, if people are going to lose money, I can cut it down. And at the end of the day, you're able to promote a business that people can continuously trust. Thank you.
Thank you, Harrison. One of the things you also hear within FinTech is that as you have as many startups trying to find business opportunities, add value, monetize that, you also have criminals also actively setting up their own operations to take advantage. So it's a constant battle, but it's one, especially in FinTech, that we just have to take as top of mind. It's not an add-on, it's a core part of whatever service or product you're offering. The security agenda must be primary. I think that's one of the key things we've had. I think we'll take one or two more questions, and then if you start thinking through some of the questions you may have for some of the panelists. So I'll direct this back to you, Akin, around CBN. Harris had said that around the cybersecurity space, so there's been new regulation on that, and even from my own point of view, I'm seeing a faster pace. Like we said, innovation will always lead, but I'm detecting a faster pace in sending things out, more agility on the part of CBN. There are one or two key things we can kind of talk through, maybe at an approach level, that I know is usually top of mind, at least for me in my role and as we partner. That's around CBN's approach to things like cloud, like data portability. People say, well, you can't store your data, this solution won't work. You can't store your data outside Nigeria, and then someone comes and says, no, that's not, CBN didn't say that, you know. So we've talked about cloud, even things emerging, I think Bumi alluded to it, around blockchain, even if it's not cyber currency, but this blockchain technology. Wow, what is the approach, the thinking? And because we may not have the exact positions, and I don't want to commit you to anything to say the assistant director said. I don't want to put you in that position, but kind of walk us through the approach CBN has to assessing all of these emerging issues, and just a philosophical approach that yes, it will happen, and they will respond to it, or they're more entrepreneurial or agile in working with stakeholders, because everyone's a stakeholder on saying, what should this be? Because the point I'm making there is, I know there's a payment system vision 2030, and CBN called for comments on what should go in there, and I was one of the people that responded for FirstBank. So that's showing a listening approach, but kind of talk through more. So as people think, no, is CBN on our side, or what can we take or what can we not?
CBN is on your side. I think, let me start from Tosin, right? Yes, she mentioned quite a number of approaches, outcome-based, collaborative, iterative. Perhaps you've tried all. Right. And I'll tell you about this. I see Mr. Bajomo right there. I recall when we were talking about payment system vision 2020 in 2005. We called bankers, technology players within the banking industry, and we talked extensively. What can we do? How can we go about it? In fact, I think regulation at that point was led by the industry, because we recognize the fact that, oh, we don't know all this. So definitely we are listening, but we also at some point had to step in and say, okay, fine. Having grown it to this point, 2014 thereabout, you begin to see things exploding. Subsequent to cashless policy, the fact that infrastructure was beginning to get so much transactions, things were happening, frauds started setting in. Of course, bank verification number came in about that time. So when we now sit back and we see cloud, we see blockchain, we see virtual currency or what, or you're trying to avoid crypto, but it's actually here. We haven't changed our approach. We are still listening. We've sent out the request for information on the Payment System Vision 2030, where we identified open banking cloud, blockchain, as get more information from the practitioners, those who are actually out there. Try to understand the pain points and see how can we use innovation to solve some of this problem. And I think that is where we need to have that shift. The innovators are coming with brilliant ideas about user experience, about scaling so fast. How about we start thinking and asking the innovators to give us also innovations around risk management, around KYC, around compliance, around cybersecurity, use artificial intelligence. It's perhaps one of the biggest applications should be in security. So the moment we start seeing that collaboration from the operators, because the CBN is open, we don't know many things. Just like, of course, the bankers don't know as much when it comes to certain technology that we see being used now. So we need to get more information from the industry. We need to sit down and, like she said, iterative approach. We need to keep tweaking our regulation. I'll give you an instance. Mobile Payments Regulatory Framework, which Bumi alluded to, came out 2009, and one of the items we mentioned there was USSD. And it appeared that those who came forward at that point in time really didn't see the light in USSD, and they went straight for mobile app. And then a bank came in subsequently and dusted up USSD, and USSD became something else. But of course, while the bank was trying to do that, it came to CBN, and I guess FinTech needs to learn from that as well. We have this idea, we're doing this, we're beginning to see the numbers, it's growing, it's going to be greater than this. What do you think? Because we want to really make it bigger. And we said, okay, fine. We're not saying you shouldn't do this, but have you counted the costs? How about this risk? Are you ready to indemnify your customers to this tune? So we need to start counting the cost when we are moving very fast. Because if we don't, we end up disrupting the financial system in the negative way, and then we lose business. So while we are very receptive to ideas and we welcome more ideas, I think it's also important that innovators and operators start thinking of solutions to those issues we are concerned about. We all should be concerned about it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think that is a really, really good point. I don't know how many fintechs founders are in the house, but I know the PSB 2030 questionnaire is on CBN's website. As you can see, it starts to let you know and even identify opportunities and direction around some of the topics CBN is thinking through. But the more important point, which I made earlier, is that they're listening and you're not helpless in shaping that policy. As Akin said, a number of the regulations have been industry-led themselves, right? So it's a partnership. So if you are a stakeholder in that industry, I think if you have a position, CBN calls for white papers, they call for conferences, you have to be active as well. I think that's one of the key things. Because I've seen that firsthand in PSB 2030. I'm going to cheat a little bit and extend the topic beyond legal, security, and regulatory to ethics, right? One of the key areas we're finding, and Akinos mentioned it, is around artificial intelligence and robotics. But there's a narrative out there around how AI and RPA are going to disrupt people's ways of life. You get what I mean? So it's a future of work. So that people that believe half the population will be, I guess, late fallow in the new age, in the new AI age, right? So I think I'll direct this one to Bumi, really, in terms of when you see some of these new technologies, they're indeed very disruptive, and they have social impact beyond financial and obviously profit. How do you navigate that space in your thinking and defining the narrative or shaping the narrative more positively? Because for me, I'm running a big AI RP agenda within the bank, but I'm very careful as well for it not to be seen as a displacement agenda as well. So is this an issue that even comes up? If it does, how do you think?
I think that's a really good point, and I imagine in the first industrial revolution, second, third, when a car was invented, there was probably some people running around and saying, hey, what's going to happen to my horse carriages and things like that. But at the end of the day, net, cars, automobiles brought us, a lot of, incredible efficiency. And I think for me, it kind of comes down to the idea that, efficiency on a national scale or global scale actually trickles to everybody. So net, it's a positive impact. And for me, I take a very good example. I think it was, last year or earlier this year that the Prime Minister of Israel went on TV and said, hey, we want to be at the forefront, top 3 countries in the world when it comes to artificial intelligence. And the way we're going to do it is that at the secondary school level, artificial intelligence will become a compulsory subject, right? And all government agencies must align, speaking about the ecosystem of regulators, the defense, and so on and so forth. So when you think about that, right, it's sort of scary, but at the same time, they understand where they're going, right? And there's already a case study. So 2010, they made a similar announcement for cybersecurity and said, hey, we want to be in the forefront of cybersecurity, et cetera, et cetera. Still early stages back then, almost 10 years ago. And last year, Israel is sort of, top 3, probably in cybersecurity in the world. $1 billion, over $1 billion was raised into cybersecurity startups in Israel alone. Now, for context, all of Africa tech startups raised about $1 billion last year, right? And this is just a 10-year journey for them. So, my summary is that, at the end of the day, one has to think about it globally and say, hey, do we want to reposition this organization? Do we want to reposition the country? It's good for everybody because the net effect is that there's more jobs created elsewhere, to add value. There's more profitability for the organization. And I think the challenge to us as a country is when the president of Nigeria or the head of the CBN comes and says, this is our national agenda, everybody aligned, we want fintech to be big. And so instead of looking at regulation as something that is, sort of a protectionist type of approach, we're looking at it more like a disruptive innovation type of approach. 2 different mindsets.
Thank you very much. I want to call attention to 2 things actually we just talked around, and again, that's to the fintechs in the house. We see regulation, security, legal issues as almost barriers to be managed, whereas they themselves present opportunities in themselves for fintechs because they're real issues, real solutions to be provided, real problems to be solved in that space. So maybe that's a changing narrative to say, look, this cybersecurity agenda, this regulatory agenda, do we turn it from being a problem but a market opportunity as well? Because you've talked through that and we're seeing it. There's a lot of investments around the security and regulatory space as well. So just something to think through as well. I think I'll pause here. I think I made a commitment that we make it more interactive. Please, any questions?
My
My name is Omotayo Akinyo. I'm a legal practitioner. My question is being directed at Mr. Akin, CBN representative there. I have a question, then a recommendation, even though that recommendation seems to have been addressed. For the question, please, how does the CBN intend to protect customers, I mean users of these online platforms now, most especially the USSD codes? You know, recently that platform has been so susceptible to fraud, and it's becoming alarming that anyone can just pick up a phone, you know, in light of the fact that the security system in the country is quite very serious. So it seems anybody can just call my phone, they access my bank accounts, not just one, but all my accounts, and access the funds and transfer the funds. So what's the CBN doing to protect consumers, I mean customers of these banks, from such instances, from such fraudulent cases? Because I'm aware that once you press, let's say for instance, star 9 something hash, and it brings out some certain details. For some banks, it allows you to change the existing thing without you even going to the bank. Okay. So meaning a third person can change your PIN and get access to your bank account and transfer the funds. So I just need the CBN's position on that, what they're doing, the security measures being put in place. Then my recommendation will be this. My recommendation will be this. I think the CBN should be subsequently be proactive in terms of legislations relating to fintech. For instance, we know where the US and other developed countries are today. So when we are bringing forward legislation before the National Assembly, let us factor in things that can be. I don't think that will be considered as being over-regulating that particular thing. Thank you.
We'll take 2 or 3 more questions so that we can take the responses all in question.
My name is Rosamond, and my question is to the Assistant Director of Payments of CBN. We know, I'm sure that we have loads of regulation for MMOs, but at the same time, we also understand there are loads of gray areas when it comes to some regulations as far as it concerns MMOs. Now, one of them is in terms of KYC level 1, you don't need to verify the information they give you. But at the same time, you have situations where you know that these are clearly junk data that don't make sense. And then you have customers challenging that, why do you want, you know that this doesn't make sense, and we've applied rules to checkmate junk names. And you have customers challenging you that, well, you don't need to verify me because I'm in level 1. But at the same time, this data doesn't make sense. Now, where was the position of the regulator in this instance where you don't need to verify your name, but at the same time, the name doesn't make sense? Where was the position of CBN in that circumstance? The other question I have is, we know that there are rules of regulation as well for us in terms of mobile money. There's guidelines for mobile money service in Nigeria. But we also find there are cases where, like, a lot of Nigerians, they want to start becoming entrepreneurs and they want to become agents of these MMOs. But you have regulations saying you have to have proof of commercial activity for 12 months, well, it's standard 6 months. But at the same time, you have a lot of Nigerians that want to come on board, be an agent for this mobile money and for most of these MMOs. Where does that play? At the same time, we want to respect the regulator in terms of making sure this will have commercial activities for a certain number of time. But also, you have lots of Nigerians that want to start up stuff for themselves. Is there like flexibility for MMOs in terms of, oh well, if the customers if these people have provided some information, do we have like flexibility to like overlook the fact that they've not had commercial activity going on for a certain number of time as requested by the regulator? Thank you.
We've spoken a lot about partnerships, but and this is not just the CBN, but we found that a lot of times when you're advising a client or a company and you say, oh, we're working with a company that's licensed to provide this particular service, and then later on it gets unwound and you get told that no, this sort of partnership can't work. I know there's a new regulation on the CBN, sort of indirect participants and all of that, but what is the framework for partnership? What is the CBN's, or what is the regulators' approach in seeing something as being sort of like a regulatory cover, so to speak?
The second one, I think I caught the second part, which is why is the agent banking regulation so creating a high hurdle for people to sign up as agents around SANF? You had two questions in one. What was the first one?
Yeah, mobile money.
Mobile money as well.
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate those questions and also your recommendation. On being proactive with regulation, especially as it affects USSD, perhaps you are aware or not about the fact that we released the USSD framework, regulatory framework last year. Of course, that's equal to mobile payments regulatory framework. That was informed by the fact that we saw the level of adoption and acceptance of that channel. Having seen that, we had to come out with that regulation. And that regulation clearly stipulated the roles of the financial service provider as well as even the roles of telcos within that space. We're not doing it all by ourselves. In the spirit of collaboration, we had NCC with us all through the course of coming out with that regulation. The banks were also present. We also had even value-added service providers to ensure that we considered all shades of opinion. Some of the specific provisions within that regulation has to do with what is required to, or the minimum expected of the bank before it can avail a user that service. For example, before then, a bank can just enroll you without your knowledge. But now it's compulsory that you opt in. So if your bank has enrolled you on a USSD platform or you just suddenly attempted to use it and it goes through straight, there's a problem with the bank and you can actually take them up on that if there is any fraud on your account. That's one. Aside that, we also, on issues of authorization and authentication, we identified some key data points that is attached to your phone and your SIM card that can be used by both banks and the telcos to actually review your operations with your phone as well as your transaction before making that decision to authorize or decline your transaction. Beyond that, we are already engaging NCC as well as the telcos to discuss the modalities for ensuring that your SIM card can be protected or your banking transaction can be protected from SIM swap fraud, which is very common, or which has become very common with USSD usage in the financial services sector in Nigeria. And that arrangement is ongoing. We're trying to see how to tidy up the commercials around it. Of course, that is left to the business people. We can't, negotiate for banks and telcos. They have to come together, agree as to how to share information to secure users of their services. Now, that is very key, and discussions are ongoing to ensure that we manage that aspect. But one quick win we've had around that SIM swap fraud is the fact that NCC had already increased the requirement for you to swap your SIM from your telcos. So it's not as easy as it was before. So that has actually impacted positively on the level of SIM swap fraud. But eventually, when we get the automated resolution, the innovative resolution to all this, which actually has to do with technology, informing and stopping transactions based on behavioral monitoring of your SIM, then we perhaps will be able to beat our chest. And that's what we're working on. The CBN has already given the nod to some operators' needs, for example, to collaborate with banks as well as telcos to ensure that when a SIM has been swapped, perhaps in the last 48 hours, that particular SIM will not be able to do a transaction until the bank has been able to confirm that the holder of the SIM was actually the one that did the swapping. So those are some of the things we've done around USSD. On KYC level 1, the thing around mobile payments and transactions over the mobile phone is that we've always believed, and there's been that argument that that's the solution to financial inclusion, or financial exclusion, I should say. Now, we don't want to impede growth in that space. So KYC level 1 becomes something very important to all of us, because that is the entry level for someone who you're introducing to the financial services, to financial services. Now, you talked about the funny names that you see. And of course, we know that KYC level 1 requires just your name and your phone number, basically. However, that does not stop us from taking further precaution if we suspect, based on the kind of transactions we see, and that's where your innovation comes in when it comes to compliance to regulation. If somebody has onboarded and with a frivolous name that you've suspected, technology is available to place it on a watch to see the kind of transaction that is going on. And if you are convinced that this particular account was opened up for fraudulent purposes, you can as well take that proactive step as well to block and call for more investigation before you decide whether you want to continue to operate with that particular account holder or not. Another thing we are seeing is that somebody operates as KYC level 1 for perhaps less than a week or so, and it's upgraded itself to KYC level 3. Then you ask the question, how did he get to KYC level 3 to the point there when he starts defrauding big ticket transactions? So it's on us as operators to also ensure that we deploy technology to manage the kind of transactions we are seeing on our platforms. When transactions are coming through, it's not just to get the fees, but to also dimension the patterns we are seeing. The interesting thing about payments is that it tells a lot of stories, and it actually shows you patterns and behaviors that you can see and say, okay, this is deviant, or this is not the right kind of transaction I want to be seeing on my platform. When we start seeing that, we need to be proactive in blocking such and investigating. On super agents, again, still on financial inclusion. What I would say to your question is, if you feel that you have something, an alternative to 12 months of commercial activity on the platform, right? There's nothing wrong in reaching out to us at the central bank saying, okay, I can recruit 50,000 agents in the next 3 months if you allow me to use my solution, which will address your concern. All you need is engaging with us to say, this is my solution to 12 months. I'm not going to need 12 months of commercial activities before I'm assured of the personality I'm dealing with. But this is how I'm going to prove that this is a genuine person and the right person to transact with. And when you come forward and that is reviewed and we're comfortable with that, we allow it to go on. And that's where the iterative bit comes in. Yes, we always listen to those that have our licenses. And also, I think something came up along the line, I don't know when, about partnerships. We're also happy to see innovators partnering with banks, even when they are not, when they don't have the minimum capital that is required. The bank is able to bring you forward and say, look, we are sure that we've engaged with this person, maybe within our innovation lab, and we're sure of what is here to present and provide, and we can manage the risk around it. We are happy to listen to that. I think I've taken off.
So I've been told we have 10 more minutes. So let's leave Mr. Akin from CBN, let him USSD security. Then we'll take 2 more questions. One, you're a FirstBank customer. No. 1 and 2. Go ahead, Harrison.
Just to add that USSD, there's a framework, there's a CBN directive around that. And for FirstBank, I'm aware that if you look at the industry, we do the highest volume and our fraud is the lowest. And I'll share with you some of the actions we've taken. Beyond the capacity to be able to look at the behavioral pattern, let me make something very clear. No matter how rugged a padlock looks, if you put the right key, it will open, right? First is, there are responsibilities, due diligence on the bank. There's a certain level of responsibility on the person. And I'll give you an example. So someone says they're doing transactions on my card. One of the transactions you can do on a card is called card not present, right? So you just need details from the card. Someone had taken a picture of the front and back of the card, presented it for a card not present transaction within the jurisdiction of the person. Within similar transactions the person had done before. So the transaction went through. So it asks, but I didn't do this transaction. And I said, in reality, in digital world, it's just like your username and password. What is required is the right details. It's only when you get to biometrics that you begin to say, I want to be sure it's the right person. So people need to move a bit forward to understand that every detail that is provided to you by your bank or by fintech or by any other person that is around your transactions, you need to keep it very well.
So secure your information.
Now, yeah. First is, again, I'll be surprised that you can take a phone and be able to change your PIN without interacting with the bank. I'll be surprised because I know it's not possible with our own USSD. It's also not possible that you can. So there are 3 categories of security you could look at. Points of security. One is enrollment. How is enrollment
thank you
done?
Harrison.
My name is Kamala. My question is to Omi. I wanted to ask Sydney, but I think you are full. Yeah. I mean, this regulator is always, all around the world, is always behind innovation, but can be faster. Now, mine is to Omi. I'm looking at the regulatory environment, and yes, we still have a lot of innovations and things that are coming up in this space. So, you as an investor and also as an entrepreneur, what are you most excited about in terms of, so as an entrepreneur, what you want to go into, and as an investor, what you would like to put your hands into?
Good question, Walter.
I think that, payments was a very big space and oversaturated, and we kind of saw that move into lending. So lending now is like, a big space and oversaturated, and we have a few assets in lending. And then in 2019, sort of this idea of transportation technology is now the biggest one that's raised, so much money. You saw how much OPay, got $50 million or so. Max.ng, which is one of our investments, they raised $7 million. Kobo 360 announced, I think, $30 million. So that's hot as well. But I think the way to think about these cycles is that the good entrepreneurs and the good investors see it before it actually came. So if I tell you my secret now, then I will not have a job anymore. No, I'm just joking. I think there's a few areas and themes that are very interesting right now for the future. I think cybersecurity is an area where, you know, there's a lot to be done. Of course, the intellectual capacity and the training and all type of things that you need, you know, for that is very limited locally. You know, artificial intelligence is a very big space. Virtual assets is a very big space, especially if you think about it as a new type of money. So it's going to have savings, you know, investments, you know, lending, and this whole ecosystem of services around virtual assets that are not, you know, fiat. So I think there's a big opportunity around those three themes.
Thank you very much, panelists. I think I'll just do a quick wrap on what we've discussed. I think coming into the session today, I think we started by talking around all the issues, regulatory jurisdiction, data privacy, cybersecurity, KYC, and all the like. But as we went through the panel and from the questions, it's very obvious that this actually are key drivers of fintech. They're not really hurdles, at least from my personal point of view. There are frameworks in place, there are tools in place, there are resources in place, legal, cybersecurity, venture, CBN in place to help drive activities in this area. So on the first blush, it's always legal, regulatory security as hindrances, but I think the reverse, I think, is what we're now seeing, that this is a key element of your sustainability and competitiveness in the marketplace. But more importantly, there are tools and resources in place to manage them effectively. And the better you manage them, the more competitive your product and services will be, and the more viable your business will eventually be. And then I think the other key point is that this space, cyber, KYC, legal, also represent very viable market opportunities for innovators as well, because there's a lot going on there. So I'd like us to give a hand to our panelists. Thank you very, very much. I think we'll be Tosin, Ryan, Harrison. And I hope you all got some things around the session. Like I said, I was really surprised at how many people came in recognizing this is a key aspect of business, especially in fintech. So looking forward to more interactions with you all as we join the hall. Okay? Thank you very much. So we're going back